Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Transformations Cafe, where we're trying to serve light as bold as love. Thanks to those of you joining us live, and for those who may see this later on YouTube. I want to just mention that the Institute for Global Transformation, IFGT, is a nonprofit, all volunteer organization, and our vision is a world working together to utilize the power, love, and wisdom of higher consciousness to benefit humanity and the planet. Our mission is to support transformations in consciousness and in the way humanity interacts with one another, so as to bring about positive change in the world individually and collectively. If you haven't already, please visit us at our website, theglobaltransformation.org. Lots more information about us is on the site, obviously, and you can join our community clicking the join button at the top of any page. And if you'd like to support our work, including programs like this one, there's also a donate button at the top of each page that will link you with PayPal. We are recording this program, and it will be published probably within the next 2 weeks or so on IFGT's YouTube channel, which we invite you to please subscribe to, and then click that bell icon you should be familiar with by now to set up the notifications so you know whenever we do provide new content. Transformations Cafe differs from a lot of other spirituality-based programs that are now easy to find in this similar marketplace, in that this is a conversation with a live audience. And we're very fortunate tonight to have a number of people joining us. And I thank each and every one of you for doing so and your patience again with our delayed start. If you want to, please join the conversation, because this is not just a passive watch interview. So with that, I am delighted to start our year off. This is our first interview of 2024, and we thought that we would continue what we had been doing last year by focusing on what is called the wisdom, the ancient wisdom, the perennial wisdom or philosophy, and it goes by a number of names. And to start the year off, we're very, very grateful and delighted to have returning to our program, Georgia Lambert. So Georgia Lambert is an internationally acclaimed instructor who teaches numerous esoteric classes. She has over 50 years of experience in the field of esoteric studies, so you can already tell she's special because she's only 35. Receiving formal training in Eastern and Western disciplines, methods, and traditions. She was the first person to be licensed by the state of California to teach meditation and esoteric physiology, and she served for 10 years on the teaching staff of the Philosophical Research Society under Manly Palmer Hall. Specializing in the synthesis of Western mystery tradition, she has addressed private groups in both the United States and in Britain. She's currently teaching in-depth classes to students around the world via an online audiovisual medium that she never has technical problems with, and has taught consistently for the last 40 years. Her classes cover a wide range of esoteric traditions and meditation techniques, including the ageless wisdom, the Kabbalah, Masonry, and the Arthurian quest for the Grail. In addition to teaching, Georgia is the author of Group Dynamics, a treatise on the working dynamics of groups, and is currently working on several books, including a book on internal disciplines and esoteric physiology for physicians, and a completed treatise on the working dynamics of esoteric groups. So there's more to your wonderful life's work, Georgia, that I didn't want to read everything and steal even more of our time. And I invite people to go to your website, which we'll have in our program notes on YouTube if they want to learn more about you. But we are truly, truly grateful and honored to have you back. And I will also say at the outset, I was looking back on it in June, I believe, of this year, I will have been your student for 3 years. And it has been a remarkable and profound set of changes in my life. And I personally can't be more grateful. So this is also an honor to be able to talk to you outside of class. And I will send you the digital apple, I promise. So welcome to Transformations Cafe, Georgia.
It's good to be here. And I know many of you. So hi, everyone.
So as I mentioned in the introduction, we've been having several conversations amongst some of the administrative team members with IFGT in the last several months about what we want to bring to the efforts to raise consciousness. And many of the people in IFGT are familiar with more of the esoteric aspects of spirituality. And you don't find a lot of that, at least I haven't, in the larger marketplace, although there are increasing references that I see. And instead of trying to kind of water it down or put it in language that a broader audience might know, we think there is an audience that wants to hear more of this directly. And so that's generally the direction we're leaning to. And so also, I thought, though, before we get into some specifics about what the wisdom might tell us for the time we're in right now, I know after the almost 3 years I've studied with you, I would probably still have difficulty succinctly telling someone what the wisdom is. And so I wonder if you are able to do that, or if you have kind of a definition, Georgia, that you would be able to share.
Well, in all times and places, the wisdom exists, but the nature of it, the composition of it changes depending on where humanity is on the path. At the beginning of each age, overshadowing humanity is what the Hindus call a rain cloud of knowable things. So at the beginning of each age, 2,500-year period, which is the period we're in now, the period where we're changing ages, the overshadowing soul of humanity creates a body of wisdom to be unfolded during that 2,500-year period. So obviously, the rain cloud of knowable things that overshadows humanity today is different than it was 2,500 years ago. But in each age, the wisdom that is overshadowing humanity has to do with the ways and means of humanity moving along the path of initiation. You know, in classes, we talk about how the path of evolution governs most of humanity. It's a long, slow, unconscious process of trial and error. But sooner or later, the individual starts to realize that there's got to be more to life than what he knows. And so he begins to seek and enters that period, which I call spiritual smorgasbording, looking for the answer in all the usually wrong places, but at least the looking begins. And at that point, the individual begins to initiate himself into the new path, moving from evolution to initiation. Initiation isn't something that happens to you because you earn enough spiritual brownie points. Initiation is you initiating yourself into that next step. And so for humanity today, that next step is moving from emotional polarization, or using the emotion as your base of operations, to moving into the development of mind. And this is not the cold intellect. This is mind that includes the emotions, includes physicality. So for the mass, this shift is from just living emotionally to using the mind to solve the problems we've gotten ourselves into. But within that greater overlook of humanity, there are also groups within humanity that are also moving forward. those that are on the path of initiation and are becoming the teachers and pioneers within humanity, not just in religion and philosophy, but in every particular avenue of human expression. And so today's disciples are finding their work not just in esoteric schools, but in everything that humanity is undergoing: politics, science, business, economics, everything.
Okay, thank you. I think well, every word is a gem, but the thing that I would like to emphasize is that this is information that has been shared with humanity for as long as we know, correct? And as a matter of fact, someone told me, Marianne, it might have been you, that yes, that there was a new pyramid discovered that is 27,000 years old or something. So our human history may be being rewritten significantly. And throughout it, there has been this wisdom, which has one of my favorite things that Georgia says is the wisdom is the wisdom. You will find it in many different forms, but the information is the same. And we talk about many paths up the same mountain leading to the same truth at the summit. And so this is the wisdom that we're talking about. And as I also, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the difference is that in the past, I mean, there have always been pioneers and seekers within humanity, and the wisdom has always been available to those. But the difference today is that it's being made available to humanity more en masse than ever before, partly because of humanity's evolutionary development, and humanity's pulling on overshadowing help and aid. But it's more available than ever before. And part of the work of this next 2,500 years is to make it as known a profession, for instance, as psychology and psychiatry is today.
And that certainly is something that IFGT is deliberately participating in as well. So yes, we're a good example of that. As you often refer to the marketplace and the information on spiritual in items. I don't know how to cast a big enough umbrella term, but there's all sorts of things that you can now find with needing lifetimes to consume all of the information, say on YouTube or Gaia or any number of other places, social media, etc. And one of the things that prompted us to think about inviting you for this particular episode of Transformations Cafe at the very beginning of 2024 is I have, and I'm sure I'm far from alone in just kind of being bombarded with all sorts of people talking about 2024 and all of the like the YouTube thumbnails are all in like 40 font, just exclaiming that, big changes in 2024 and all sorts of things. And so what I was hoping we could do with your guidance is to see what the wisdom might say about this year in particular, or about this general period of years. I've heard different astrological forecasts, and there are all sorts of entities that are channeled, and there is some similarity in what they say. And whether this is just part of synchronicity or good fortune, but in our more recent classes, you've also started to address these things, but I thought it would be interesting to bring to a broader audience a lot of the themes that I've heard from elsewhere about these great predictions of chaos and civil war and more separation and polarization. Some people do also say, but this is part of a larger process. But I thought, one, we could kind of see what, if anything, that you could share, that the wisdom itself talks about, either specifically for this year or again these years just preceding and maybe in the next 2 to 5, say in the future, and then go from there.
Oh gosh, well, it's really interesting. Like you, I've run across all kinds of predictions and so on and so forth. Remember that in metaphysical tradition, the plane of mind is the plane of cause for the human condition. In other words, what has taken form as thought casts its shadow and becomes emotion or astral form, which again casts its shadow and eventually becomes physicality. So if we look at the mind of humanity, we see a plethora of possible futures. I mean, from science fiction writers to movies to, channeling, as you say, there's everything out there from, visions of a golden age to visions of Armageddon and so on and so forth. And it all already exists on the mental plane. It's already in form. The question is, which one is going to land? And that has to do with the ones we feed. Again, there's the famous story of the little boy who goes to visit his Native American grandfather and sees the 2 wolves at the door fighting one another. And he asks the grandfather which one will win. And the grandfather says, "The ones I feed." And so if we're constantly focused on the negative, that's where our attention is going. So we need to change a few things around. In classes, I talk about how 2 of the weapons that have been used since ancient times to control the population are guilt and fear. And fear is a negative attachment to the future. Guilt is a negative attachment to the past. We need to change fear into hope and aspiration. And we need to change guilt into compassion and understanding. And so we have the world discipleship in a position that they haven't been in before in the last 2,500 years, because the game plan before was, develop your own spiritual alignment, leave the earth plane, get to nirvana, free yourself from the wheel of rebirth and go elsewhere. But the energies of this new age have to do with bringing heaven to earth and making heaven and spirituality a reality down here. And so the world discipleship is having to do something it's not used to doing, which is to get involved in things of the world.
Yeah. And well, are you willing to share anything that though might be specifically talked about in this time or this year in particular, or to the extent that the things that we're hearing from these other avenues, do those things ring true? And then definitely want to go back deeper into what you were just sharing about what we can do about in this time.
A couple of things. First of all, in the short-term cycle, when we look at the cycle of matter finishes her cycle at winter solstice, where matter gives birth to the Christ at the darkest, densest point of the whole year. There's this weird period between winter solstice and February 2nd, which is just around the corner, which the Christian version of this is called Candlemas. The meaning of this is the Virgin Mary, in giving birth to the Christ, birth was considered an unclean act, and so there was a period of purification before Mary was allowed back in the temple. But on an older, deeper level, this period between winter solstice and February 2nd is a period of instability. This is true every year, not just this one. And this is the time when matter kind of has to reorganize itself and re-virginize itself for the spring as it moves up in the full moon of Aries and Taurus and Gemini, because that's when the spiritual download happens for the year. So it's no surprise that our tradition of New Year's resolutions, setting new directions, is smack dab in the middle of this time between winter solstice and Candlemas. So in the short term, we all have a few days more to kind of get our ducks in a row and set our new intents for this coming year, because this cycle of complete chaos and instability is going to find a direction here shortly, and will be set for the year. Now, astrology is not my forte, but from what I've gleaned from astrologers who are friends, has to do with a lot of opening of possibilities, especially as we hit 2025. Now, it doesn't mean things are going to magically change. We probably won't see real change until 2026. I think it's going to be a period of continued instability and pretty much chaos on all levels for a while yet. But the direction of opening for humanity, if we can take the opportunity, we have a chance of a real expansion in consciousness. And what will bring that about in terms of the masses, your guess is as good as mine. But there are a lot of things that are converging right now. Also, on a very deep spiritual level, it's said that the spiritual hierarchy of our planet, headed by the Christ, has a conclave every 100 years where they, in relationship to humanity, decide on certain directions that have to do with the interaction between the planetary heart center, the spiritual hierarchy, and humanity, the planetary brain or throat center. This next conclave is going to be in 2025. And all the esoteric writings say that the main topic on the agenda is the reemergence of the spiritual hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen in 2026, but it means that certain directions will be chosen, not only by humanity and their response to livingness, but by the spiritual hierarchy itself. Certain directions will be chosen to be unfolded in this next 100-year period. So we're in a window here of not only the period between winter solstice and Candlemas in the short term, but in a longer term, for the next 2 or 3 years, we have a chance to really set some new directions if we can, again, keep those positive goals as our future.
Okay, that's great. That's what I was hoping that we could learn from you, because it does sound like there is correlation with a lot of what others are bringing to this spiritual marketplace that the wisdom would agree with, but you're also saying that it's tied to some other things. And I want to see if we can maybe define a couple terms just in case folks that are either with us now or see this in the future might not understand, but there is correlation. And I think what's so important is also to keep our focus on the positive, which we're not unique in saying that, but there are reasons beyond just trying to look on the sunny side of life. That
and it doesn't mean looking at the world, it doesn't mean looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff we've got to fix, and right, we can't fix what we refuse to see. So it's important that we see, that which is out of harmony and out of balance, so that it can be addressed.
Can you just, if I know some of these things are not easy to talk about if someone has no prior knowledge, but let's see if we can give it a shot. So you talked about the planetary hierarchy. How would you define that to someone who hasn't heard of that term?
It's that level of consciousness that has reached what we would call adeptship or mastery. This is that consciousness that chooses to stay behind for the sake of humanity. This would include the masters, adepts, the great avatars and teachers of humanity throughout the ages that have, rather than gone on, decided to stay, as the esoteric tradition says, to stay within the dark star here and until all of humanity has found its way to enlightenment. So the spiritual hierarchy has been called many things. The Rosicrucians called it the invisible college. It's been called the communion of saints. It's been called the spiritual hierarchy, the conclave of adepts. There's lots of different ways it's talked about throughout the ages.
Great. Okay. That's helpful, and I hope others found that as well. And then the other term that it would be good to explain, I think, just so that we don't confuse things, especially because IFGT makes significant efforts to assure that we are not proposing any specific teacher, teachings, religion, any dogma whatsoever, but you use the term the Christ, and it's a very important distinction, and wouldn't want anyone to stumble into this and think that you're referring to Jesus.
Right. The way that the esoteric community uses the term Christ, it's an office, it's a state of consciousness, not a name.
Right. And actually, I did hear an interview with a Catholic priest once who talked about the fact, and I had never thought of this before, but he said that wasn't his last name. It wasn't like his parents were Mr. and Mrs. Christ. So it's put it in a good perspective. So Rachel has asked a question which is right on cue with kind of what I was thinking about too, in terms of what are some of the positive things then that we can be doing? And I would talk about those, or ask you to talk about those, both individually and then collectively.
You know, when I was teaching classes 30, 40 years ago, I remember, and I have it on tape back in the old days when we all used cassette tapes. I have it on tape where I've said many, many times back then that we would come to a time when things would be so divergent, so black and white, that even the most unconscious person can make choices. And that's really where we are today. Humanity is being forced to make choices. Humanity itself, as a kingdom in nature, is moving through a particular initiation, which has to do with choice. The problem is that things are so confused that sometimes it's hard to see what's real and what isn't real. You can't figure it out from the lower concrete mind. You can't figure it out from the throat center, because there's too much disinformation and misinformation and people in their pet behaviors, and it's just too chaotic. So what do you do when you don't know mentally, when you don't know which direction is right, which direction is the highest and best? In that case, you have to also rely on your heart. And I'm not talking about the warm, fuzzy, gooey, aspirational solar plexus. I'm talking about the true heart, the sense of rightness and being that each of us have at our very core. And I would suggest that as we look out at all of the mishigas going on in the world today, that remember that growth in consciousness is always expansive, never contracting, never reducing. It's always an expansion. It's always a greater inclusion, never an exclusion of parts of humanity. And if we're going to err, and we are, because none of us are adepts or masters yet, we're all going to make mistakes. But if we're going to make mistakes on the side of love, on the side of inclusion.
And something that just continues to come back to me, and I know we've talked about this quite a bit in our classes too, but just as you were saying that the heart you're referring to is not the stuff of Hallmark cards and emojis. This is that higher self that we can, when we're quiet and have whatever practice we have or practice says, to get in touch with that love, which is really everything. But in these times, I think the amount of charge that is just surrounding us all the time, that can also affect our ability toward self-compassion and directing that love inward, which then I think greatly affects which of the wolves we would feed.
Exactly. And, it's so easy to get caught up in all the details. It's important to remember that humanity is a one life, that we, the soul, have had incarnations in every ethnicity, every religion, every gender, every possibility. And humanity is a one life. And so via our thoughts, via our emotions, via our physical words and actions, to affirm the fact of the one life whenever we can, because so much of what humanity is going through right now is the affirmation of separateness.
Yeah. And so we may continue to talk about some other specifics that we can do again individually as well as collectively. But there's also something that you use a term which has some esoteric definition. So I think we should clarify that. Oh, I actually just remembered you used a term in your last answer, which I don't think is esoteric. I think it's Yiddish, Mishigas. So some people may not be familiar with that. Have fun looking it up.
From everybody. Whatever word seems to fit the best.
That certainly familiar to me. So anyway, it's actually it's the hoo-ha, it's the stuff, it's just all the noise. And a term that we'll use in class a lot is glamour, that has some specific relevance. But I thought maybe we could also talk about that, because one of the things that I've come to rely on, what I've learned from my classes with you, is ways to strengthen the skill and art of discernment, and to be able to, especially in these times with so much information, but as you said earlier, misinformation and all the swirl and the mishigas. And so how can we maybe be better at identifying what it is that we should really attend to, and what we should maybe be able to identify more and more easily as things that are feeding the wrong wolf?
Again, part of the difficulty here is not only choices between good and bad, which are kind of easy for those of us on the path, but the choices between good, better, and best, because we all want to do the highest and best thing we know. But often these days, it's almost impossible to know what that highest and best is. There's so many choices out there. And, the best thing that I can share is, whether you pray, whether you meditate, whatever your modality is, to get to that highest and best place of you, your identity at its highest and best. Get there through prayer, through meditation, through, mindfulness focus, whatever it happens to be, whatever your procedure is. Get to that place and make your decision. You can't do any better than that. You can't do any better than make a decision at your highest and best place. And it will be the right one, even if it may not be the most comfortable one. It'll be the right one, either to give you the best chance at service or to teach you something you need, or, have some experience that is vital for you to have so that you can move forward. Whatever it is, if you make that choice at the highest and best place, you can be sure it's going to be the right one, because you're not going to be able to figure it out from the intellect, from the concrete mind.
Yeah, and that's such a key point, and you brought it up earlier too, but the distinction between our kind of concrete intellectual mind and this higher mind, higher heart that we're referring to. And I think especially if you're kind of engrossed or engaged, taking in a lot of information, that I'm certainly not at the point where I can be quiet and do that at the same time. And so I think we need to be deliberate about carving those periods out in our day that we can bring some balance. When I revisited our conversation with you from a couple of years ago, there was a portion where someone who's again with us this evening, Suzanne, joined the conversation and was very enthusiastic and thanking you for saying that we shouldn't just completely turn off our attention to the news, that we have to be aware of what's going on in order to fix it. And as I was watching that, I thought, great point, but there is a balance. And I think we each need to find that place where we can take either the news in or the info from the spiritual marketplace or whatever it is, because there is so much of it, it can be overwhelming. And so to try to remain effective and keep a positive focus, but not be so tuned out that we don't, have a direction of what we're trying to focus on. So any thoughts on that?
There's, and I use this example all the time, there's a line from an old Broadway musical, Man of La Mancha, where Don Quixote and his sidekick are talking, and the phrase is, it doesn't matter whether the pitcher hits the rock or the rock hits the pitcher, it's going to go bad for the pitcher. And the spiritual version of that is, no matter how awful the personality may seem to be, individually or collectively, it's not stronger than the soul who created it. Now, the fact that we've chosen to learn through negative means is our choice. This is where we, as a species, exercise our free will. We are going to grow. The soul insists upon it. Whether we grow through positive means or negative means has to do with the choices that we make. So when we see some of these very negative conditions on the world stage, and there are many, recognize that, could we have chosen to learn whatever it is we need to learn through positive means? Yeah, we could. But humanity doesn't usually do that. We wait until our backs are against the wall in order to move forward in any, appreciable way. So even in those negative situations, there's a divine purpose trying to work itself out. And instead of just looking at that negative situation and going, oh, how terrible, yeah, to realize that you may not know what it is, but there is a divine purpose to be worked out there. And you can align with that purpose and magnetically draw it to the surface through your own magnetic focus. Remember that when we focus in the ajna center in front of the forehead, or the crown chakra, or the heart, or whatever we use for prayer or meditation, we're creating a point of magnetic evocation. And so the idea is not just to look at the negative things and say, oh, that's too bad, but to look at the negative things and say, it's too bad we chose to learn that way, but let's get that lesson to the surface so that we can work it out, so that we can move past it, so that we can resolve it. And this goes to something I always say in my classes, that, you know, people pray for peace, but peace without resolution isn't any peace at all. It's a stalemate. It's stopping fighting, but that's not peace. Peace is not static, it's very dynamic. And that comes with resolution. So pull on that resolution.
Do you think it's appropriate that with all of the upset that we're aware of, that we should still experience happiness and joy in our lives if and when we can?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's important for our health, not only our physical health, but our emotional and mental health as well. And, you know, what that is going to be different for different people, but you've got to make time for it in one's life and affairs.
And does that not also then feed that energy into the universe?
Sure, because as we were talking about earlier, you know, the game plan today is not to, you know, leave Earth and go to nirvana as quickly as possible. The idea is to bring nirvana here. And that means being thankful and grateful and loving to the things around you that you can be grateful and loving to acknowledge the fact that your bodies, you know, give you the soul presence physically, emotionally, mentally. Um, Whatever it is that you can affirm within this time and place, do that and make time for it on a daily basis.
Yeah, that's an important point, and I appreciate you emphasizing it, because it's easy to get caught in some thinking that, you know, with so much suffering, especially those of us who were raised with the idea of, you know, we had to eat everything on our plates because there were starving children in Africa. You know, it's
They probably didn't like Brussels sprouts either.
that's yeah. I wish I thought of that, fed that back to mom and dad. Well, um, so Suzanne has entered something in the chat, and I think it's appropriate to the conversation, certainly. But Suzanne, why don't you just go ahead and talk about this a little bit?
Okay, well, first of all, I want to say, you know, I'm an old student of Georgia. I think for about 3 years next year. It's just sitting here listening. I'm realizing, Georgia, so much of that is my everyday conversation or the principles I learned from you and whatever. Oh, yeah, yeah, I got that from Georgia. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you gave me such a basis of very smart. But um, you, you know, we're all different, and my mission seems to be to do something dramatic to try to get this world to change. Now, you know, is that possible? I don't know. Not likely, but I just go on the possibility that I can do this. But at any rate, it's not going to hurt anything on the way, I hope. So what I did is I put out some money. I hear, okay, we live in this world, money talks. I couldn't get anybody to talk about ideas I have for what we can do to really move the world, change the world, shift, you know, major shift of consciousness that we so need. Georgia, I love you saying that February 2nd is the beginning of a creative time, because my essay contest that I have out there, the deadline is February 14th. So I think, oh, yes, it's perfect. I didn't know that. That was new information. Um, so I've just put out this contest. I've had some help from the Scientific and Medical Network, because I'm not, you know, I needed a little gravitas, and so they've actually created this with me, and they're promoting it. But so I thought, well, I need people to talk about what we can do. What can I? Okay, here's the essay contest. It's 2050. The world is working. How did that happen? What happened in 2024 now that you're going to write about from looking from 2050? And what did you do to start it just as a little artifice? I sat next to Steven Spielberg and I gave him this idea and he made a movie. You know, it could be something like that, or you create the great project. But anyway, what do you think about a thing like that? You know, it's kind of cheeky and crazy or wild. And What do you think? Does that seem like a good idea to be looking for what we really can do if we put our heads together?
Every little bit helps in every possible frequency and every possible direction. So go for it.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. However, wherever it goes, I think it's going good. But I urge everybody to, click on that and it'll come up in your, you'll have it for later. You can take a look at the uh, the link there that'll tell you all about it.
Blavatsky many, many years ago said that the great sin here on planet Earth is separateness. And if we didn't have gender and religion and politics and ethnicity to divide us, we would invent things to divide us. And so overcoming that separateness by whatever means, whatever frequency, whatever modality, that's the name of the game these days.
Georgia, though, in the time that we were doing that, it was a long time ago, like 25 years ago. The world in LA was different. I presume that the rest of the world was as well. There was a lot of coming. We did projects with Georgia. I wasn't just her student, but my house was a kind of gathering place, and Georgia would come and lead groups and what have you. And there was such an energy for coming together. There isn't that energy anymore. Everybody.
But that happens in cycles, that coming together.
Yeah.
And then parting and coming together and parting. And we're in this weird time where so many different cycles are dovetailing into one another. You could look at it as different karmic cycles. We've got this change of an age, which is the change from the age of Pisces to Aquarius, or another way of putting it is the age of the sixth ray of devotion to the seventh ray of magic and divine order. And so the last time this particular energy was around was during the dreaded A word, the Atlantean period. And so we've got old echoes of that coming around again. Despite all the fluff and glamour and stupidness around the subject of Atlantis, there's two themes that always come to the fore, and that is genetic manipulation and using weather as weapons. And here we are today, faced with those same choices as a species at a different turn of the spiral. So we've got a lot of really old Atlantean stuff kind of bubbling up from the subconscious of humanity today. But we've got minor cycles on top of those. We've got old stuff from the Civil War up and having to raise its head again. We've got stuff from World War II coming up, raising its head again. And so we've got all of these different cycles, and more than just those I've mentioned, dovetailing into one another, which is contributing to this period of chaos. It's sort of like all the stuff that didn't get done is, right up for resolution right now, because the next shift is going to be a big one. And there's a lot of stuff that's not going to be able to go with us.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting. You just mentioned two terms, and I don't know if you saw these in the chat, but Dina has a question, and I'm going to read it. And Dina, I might need you to clarify, because I think you're talking about kind of in some sense, we can try to do some of what's been suggested, but we can have some deeply conditioned patterns. So what Dina wrote was, how does one overcome ingrained sixth ray programming and Atlantis fears? So it's not choosing good, better, best, but stagnation.
Well, the fears of the Atlantean thing, that's contributed to a great deal of collective guilt within humanity. During the previous root race, the Atlantean period, the spiritual hierarchy was in physical manifestation. There were temples and schools, and this is when the gods walked with humanity in so many different traditions. But because of the choices that humanity made during that period, we sort of suffered a stroke. If humanity is the planetary brain, we kind of suffered a stroke and forgot who we are. And so all this time since then has been trying to remember that we are the soul living within this personality. And that's, the big shift. This next big shift is to remember who we are as spiritual beings. But because of that breakage, which in many traditions is called the breaking of the Antakarana, or the breaking of the rainbow bridge between the soul and the personality, or the spiritual hierarchy and humanity, that's on the agenda to be rewoven as the spiritual hierarchy again looks at moving back into humanity in a physical way. But part of the old Atlantean thing is this collective guilt that we misused, for instance, the forces of nature in the past. And so there's this collective guilt of, well, don't do anything, because if we remain spiritual children rather than grown-up spiritual children, we don't have any responsibility. As long as we can stay children of God, that God will take care of us, we don't have to make decisions, then we don't run the risk of making bad decisions. But humanity is the decision maker for the three lower worlds, the plane of mind, the plane of the emotions, the plane of physicality. We have to make choices. It's what we do. We're the creative instrument of the planetary life and affairs. So it's not so much overcoming fears as overcoming the collective guilt, and to use our will and our choices in a positive way rather than taking a pass, because the old saying, for evil to triumph, all it takes is for good men to do nothing. So this is not the time for the world discipleship to stay silent in their thought.
Part of what this evolution is now, this initiation is to really come to understand that we are not just the personalities that we've been walking around playing our various roles being, that there is something higher to us, and to do the work to bring that more into our everyday consciousness more and more and more, because that's the place that we're moving toward. And it's a fascinating time to be living in, but we can easily get sucked into the fear and the guilt and those things that we've talked about too. And I think that is our work.
Yeah. Nate has a really good question here.
Yeah. As Earth becomes grounded, and Gary is asked to come on too, but since you mentioned Nate, let's see. As Earth becomes grounded in connection and not separateness, will life become boring without learning from adversity?
A couple of things. The fact that humanity learns through pain and suffering is a choice. We can learn through joy. We just haven't figured out how to do that yet. But as far as life becoming boring, with all the terrible things that are happening in the world, think of humanity as this little chicken in an egg, and we're just at the point of pecking through the egg. When we get that opening, we're going to find amazing life everywhere. We're going to find out that we belong to a bigger family than just here on planet Earth. We're going to find out that the consciousness of the plant kingdom that we've been sharing this planet with all along is far more sentient than we ever gave it credit for. We're going to find a new consciousness and a new way to communicate with the animal kingdom. It's not going to be boring. There's going to be lots to do and lots to discover and explore. So don't worry about it being boring ever.
Sure sounds like it beats a gold watch at the end of your career too. So.
Yeah, thanks, Ken, and thanks, Georgia, for sharing what you have with us. Like Ken, I went back and listened to the interview that you did, that Ken did with you a couple of years ago, and both in that presentation and in the one tonight, you mentioned Helena Blavatsky, and I'd like to use her as an example of kind of a larger question, but I just want to refer to a documentary done by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, for their radio network over 20 years ago, which I was able to obtain a copy of and listen to again more recently. And I think it was fairly well done, at least by my standards. But it sort of portrayed her as as something of a character, talking about her personal life and talking about a couple of the claims that she made. Having visited Tibet, they found that fairly unlikely for a woman traveling by herself to have gotten into Tibet. And I just did a quick check shortly before this session and found that claim is in dispute by scholars. You probably know a lot more about that. The other thing they mentioned was her theory about a sort of devolution that rather than humans having evolved from a common ancestor with the apes, it's that those creatures are sort of somehow devolved from humans. But rather than going into those details, my question has to do, well, let me mention one more thing. Ken did an interview a few months ago with a scientist, Mona Sobhani. Is that right, Ken?
Yeah.
And
You do need to get to your question, Gary.
Yeah, I'm almost there. And she was talking about a reconciliation between science and spirituality. And I think that probably all of us here are looking forward to that sort of thing, which will mean sort of compromise, probably on both sides. So I'm thinking that perhaps there are some imperfect vehicles, if you will, on the spiritual side, just like there are some scientists who are very stuck in their ways, but we still do need science, we need logic, we need rationality. So do you have any comments on how that reconciliation might happen? And you're probably going to mention the new physics and things like that, but sort of in general conceptual terms, how do you see that coming about?
Well,
thank you.
You've got a couple of things in there. First of all, humanity, is not composed of masters or adepts. And so it's always going to be imperfect vehicles. And, Blavatsky was a complete character and forged a lot of her stuff. But what she did as a persona doesn't interfere with the quality of the work of that secret doctrine, where a lot of the Eastern traditions came west for the first time. She was just one in a long line of those that have evolved the wisdom for humanity. There's always going to be imperfect vehicles. Judge the work by the frequency of the work itself and its value, and recognize that the vessel is just the vessel, and they'll get better as we get better. As far as the science and religion issue, of course, this really took off in the 60s with books like Dancing Woolly Masters and the Tao of Physics and things like that. And this is only going to get better and better because science is going to be forced to look into these, quote, fringe areas. For all of the glamour and the fluff and the woo-woo nonsense that you see on ghost hunter TV programs, the fact that people are just into ghost hunting has evolved into inventing really cool gadgets like electromagnetic field detectors and infrared cameras and audio programs that can pick up stuff that our ears can't hear, but conversations that show up on tape and so on and so forth. So we're having this reconnection between science and religion. And as we move into this next age, a lot of what has been considered, fringe or woo-woo will be proven not by philosophers or religionist. It will be through science. It'll be through instrumental technology that, can be proven. And this is going to be what really expands humanity's horizons.
Thank you.
Thanks. Michelle has a question, and then I'm also watching our time because I do want to respect your evening.
I have a class to teach after this, you guys.
as well as everyone else's. But Michelle's question is, doesn't true change start within? Meaning, in order to change the world, shouldn't we focus on our inner world, our thoughts, emotions, judgments, and our ability to love ourselves unconditionally?
Absolutely, but it's not an either or. It has to be a both now. In the past, there were two main avenues of spiritual approach, the path of the mystic and the path of the occultist. The mystic produced the saint. The occultist path produced the sage. It is impossible to travel one alone these days, so it has to be a both. Consciousness expands spherically as it reaches upward toward that which is above humanity. At the same time, it reaches outward into the heart of humanity. And so if we're really expanding consciousness, it's not just the consciousness above us, it's the consciousness within us. And it's both at the same time.
That's a great answer. And Michelle, thanks you as well. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, Diane? Diane,
I had to unmute. Thank you. Thank you, Georgia. Just always a pleasure to be in your presence and listen to these answers. In light of the two wolves, and I love that too, it seems like to me that we've been feeding, and we continue to, when I hear people on the path. I'm an avid student of astrology for more than 30 years. And so I listen to a lot of astrologers, a lot of different things that we all listen to. And it seems like that there's a great focus on the past, on healing. You even brought up about, well, we're going, have this guilt from Atlantean times. And it seems like if we want to actually make a leap, isn't it time in the age of Aquarius, in this great shift for humanity, to be focused on creating what we do want rather than continuous, quote, healing of the past and the wounds and the this and the, I mean, you can tell I'm really tired of it.
Yeah,
It seems like we should be moving forward and literally just dropping it.
Absolutely. Not necessarily completely dropping it without fixing it, but we've got to keep our eye on the horizon. And, it's really interesting. When you were 10 years old, think about what you thought about during the day, what you were going to be when you grew up, what you were going to do next week. It was all forward. Your attention was all forward. And then somewhere along our life's path, we find that our day-to-day reminiscing is that, reminiscing about stuff that's happened in our past conversations, past relationships, past this, past that. And we don't think about our future anymore. It's like, you're 50 years old and you don't think about what you're going to be when you grow up anymore. And so you're thinking about, past stuff. It's really important to build in the habit pattern in your own personal life of looking forward. However many years you have on this planet, there's always going to be some years ahead. And so the more we put our attention in that future. It's kind of like a fly fisherman casting a hook out into the water and then reeling ourselves toward that. If we don't cast the hook, how are we going to find that future that we want? So it's really important to start thinking ahead and realizing that all the stuff you run through your throat center during the day through the concrete mind is not just talk about the past, but talking about your service, what you're going to do, what you want to accomplish, what the future's going to hold. And you know, that takes practice, but it's really important that we add that to our lives.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed the response you had to Nate's question. It's really along, it's along that line, like, hey, let's have some fun. Right.
And I was going to say that, kind of tying a few of these comments together with the contest that Suzanne has introduced, and the work that I know that Diane and her husband Alan doing, some things that Georgie might not have touched on directly tonight, but certainly have spoken about many times in class, that these things that we think, they come into being. And whether you can have your lower and higher minds accept the idea that simply thinking things goes out into a quantum field and they come to be, or whether you want to just think about the idea of, we're all pretty used to the idea of just setting goals and then doing what you need to reach them. And however you want to think about this, what we put our focus on is what is going to come into being. And the same way you're talking about stuck in reminiscence, well, that produces nothing in the future. And it's good. I was thinking of kind of a sarcastic idea that by the time you're 50, you're reminiscing, and what are you looking forward to? Well, arthritis tends to make it a little more challenging to think about positive futures, but it's in more seriousness, it is something that, again, I think is part of what we can kind of challenge ourselves with, and that can then also fold in the things that, like Michelle brought up, that think about what do we want to be, what do we want our own lives to be, and that goes into the larger collective as well.
And it's important to remember that science has shown us that the more intelligent the species, the greater the need for play. Whether we're talking about crows or dolphins or whatever it happens to be, most adults have forgotten how to play. It's important to reclaim that in our lives. And what play is going to be different for different people. I mean, can you think in terms of mental fun? Physical fun and emotional fun, we understand, but how about mental fun too? What are we feeding our minds? Are we exercising our minds? Care and feeding includes, food and exercise, not only mentally and emotionally and physically, all of the above. So whatever play is for you, whatever is fun, that has to be a part of your life too.
Right. And I think those are kind of, I love the direction this is taking, because we've been challenged with the potential of just having the wisdom corroborate the chaos and doom and gloom forecasts, and showing how, yes, that's there. But it reminds me also, and I will start wrapping up, but there was either an example that you provided or somewhere else that I heard about recognizing also that what we're seeing is part of a larger process. And you've talked a lot of times about substance being part of what is divine, and maybe not all the forms that substance has taken is in congruency with a divine plan, but we can reformulate that form into a new form using that substance. And it's akin to if you were remodeling your kitchen and you had no idea that you had to rip everything out and it looked like a bomb went off during part of the process. And if that's all you thought it was, yes, it would be very upsetting. But if you knew that had to happen before you could get the gorgeous new kitchen with all the updated appliances and the kitchen of your dreams to cook the meals of your dreams, that we have to kind of keep that analogy in mind, I think, because we are going through changes, but it's not the end of the world. It's the beginning of something new. And I love the positivity that has come out of this.
And matter isn't the enemy. You know, this was one of the fallacies of the last age, that the bodies were bad, matter's bad, get rid of them, get to nirvana as quickly as possible. Matter is the body of God.
Yeah.
It's the clay out of which everything is made. Now, it's not matter's fault that we've built it into crummy forms, but we can smush it down and build better forms. But the matter itself is the substantial aspect of God, and therefore just as divine as anything else. And it's our job to build forms that show off that light and that divinity.
Is it cymantics that I'm thinking of? That what's the one where they show the sand changing with the different?
Cymantics.
Say again.
Cymatics.
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 Yeah. If you have not searched that on YouTube and watched those videos, now that is both something very educating, but that's mental fun too. Watch those videos. They're great. And it just shows how substance will change its form. And this is in regard to sound frequencies that change, but it's a great example of what is happening on a larger planetary scale now. And to keep that in mind. And I really appreciate, Georgia, you coming back, all the participation and the interest. We're part of a growing group of people that care and are interested in these things, and we're part of that initiation and evolution. And it's a challenge and an honor to be here at this time. So yeah, I'm glad to have all of you along for the ride with me.
And thank you so much for inviting me. And it's good to see so many faces that I know and love, and the new ones too.
Yes, and we have thanks from Marianne, who I always want to recognize that without Marianne's vision over 21 years ago now, IFGT would not be able to share all of this with everyone and as everything that's happened. So thank you, Marianne, for making this happen. And thanks to Michelle again for bailing us out technically this evening. And thank you, Georgia. Go take care of Barkley and get ready for class. And thank you all very much. Real quickly, before we go, a quick program note. Our next Transformations Cafe is at a very different day and time. It will be a week from this Friday, February 9th at 9 a.m. Eastern. We're going to bring back a couple of guests that we had to postpone because of a hurricane that was threatening last summer. And so we have Amit Goswami and Valentina Amasar. They have written a very compelling book about new ways to see health and healthcare. And so I can't wait to explore that with them. But I wanted to take this opportunity to let everyone know that our February program will be Friday, February 9th at 9 a.m. Eastern. And we'll be sending out more information about that starting tomorrow. So thank you again, everyone. Georgia, wonderful as always, and look forward to seeing you next week.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.